all done. In terms of we've put our decals on, but I do need to just glaze these dial fronts. So I'm going to use Glue and Glaze, which is a Deluxe Materials product. It's a fantastic product, which is the same product we used on the front bulkhead. So it's nice and thick, so I can just go in with my glue applicator, and we can very slowly, steadily, carefully fill the bezel. I've got a bit too much on there, so put a bit on there. All right, let's just spread that out. It just needs a thin covering, and it does dry perfectly clear. If you're on a budget, you could use PVA. That would work almost as well. Just test it first though. Not all PVAs dry perfectly clear, so you do have to be a little bit careful. Okay. We just need the smallest dab on these others. Now you might think that they look relatively shiny, but this does give them a glass-like look. So it's worth doing those extra little details. It just makes everything pop out. It's the difference between that looks really good and that looks amazing, I think. Okay, we'll let all that dry. There's a couple of things left that I want to do on this before we can say this is ready to be installed, but we're almost there. Now you can see that the glue and glaze has dried, and that just gives us a nice glass look to those dials, so I'm happy with that.
Right then, Tamiya's black panel line wash. Obviously this is an enamel wash, and I'm just using that to pick out the detail of some of those metallic parts. So that little dial that's suspended off the end there is suspended on 3 springs, 2 from the actual dial array and 1 from the inside of the bulkhead. So it's a good way of showing the detail of the springs, but we can also use it on, there's a little brass switch and a little sort of switch set or plug or something next to that. So it's just going to pick out those details and make it pop a little.
I want to do something a little bit different. I want to sort of put a little bit of a wash on it so that we've got a slightly richer colour, which I think will help bring out the colour of the dials a little bit better. So what I'm doing is I'm going to make a little wash. So using our burnt sienna here, the oil paint, I've taken a small amount and put it into my palette here, and I'm just going to thin that down so that we've got sort of a wash. And we can add a bit more if we want to thicken it up a little bit. It takes a little bit of time to break the paint down in oil paints when you're making a wash. There we go. And I'm going to leave a little bit of thinner in the pipette for now. That'll be useful if we want to do a little bit more thinning or remove it or whatever we want to do. So we'll do that. Always important when you've mixed paint to just unload your brush first. I think we need a drier piece of paper. And I'm just going to paint it over. So the wood effect that we've already put in will be still visible through it, but you can see it's just warming up the colour a little bit, making it a slightly darker wood effect. Once I've been all the way over it, we'll go round with a slightly thinner wash and just darken around the bezels and things and just add a little bit of definition to it. So it's a little bit difficult because of all the dials and things on there, but I'm trying to paint it all in the direction that I've done. So if there is any brush strokes visible, because it's an oil paint, then they look like grain because they're going in the direction of the grain. And don't worry about it being a uniformly even coverage, because that's not what wood looks like. So I'm not saying slap it on, but you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. Nature's not perfect. Okay, so you can see that is just rich, giving it a slightly richer colour. So you can see if you look at the two silver dials at the bottom, the one we put the wash around, just helps it pop out. Right, I'll finish that and then I'll get back to you. Right, last thing I need to do with our wooden components for the cockpit that I've painted and that have some form of metal objects on it is just to go around and do some shadows and a little bit of build up of dirt using the Africa Corpse wash, just as we did on the floor pan. It'll keep everything keyed in. So I just want to go around and make sure that it's all looking as I want it before we start adding other items to it and building it up with other parts that we've been painting. That will then complete all of these panels ready for being fitted into the cockpit, and we should be able to build the cockpit up fairly quickly to a point where we're then ready to put the seats in. But before we put the seats in, I want to there's some rigging that passes through there, so it'll be easier to do that before the seat's mounted, and various other things. So yeah, let's get the Africa Corpse wash on. Now add our dials. So they mount on these 2 points here. So we can put some liquid glue on the end there. Just give that a moment to start biting and dissolving the paint, and then we can go in with a second lot there, and just for good measure we can put some on our little mounting points at the back so that we're dissolving paint in there as well. So there we have it. Let's see if we can improve the light for you a bit there. That's our dials in. Now the instructions have you putting this last bulkhead in and then putting in the framework that goes along the sides here. But actually what I want to do is I want to put the camera in place that goes underneath here before we put the framework in. I think it'll just be easier. So the camera goes in pretty much at the end of where that ridge is. So let's have a look at painting up the camera. Right, we're going to use some Vallejo plastic putty for this job. It's perfect for tiny hairline cracks. So we've got one there and we've got one there, and it's just where these parts have been moulded into one side and not the other, which helps us in terms of getting something that looks moulded nicely, but it also does present us with a problem on the fit side. So one of the problems I find with this is it tends to clog. I have this in both a bottle and a tube, and have the same problem in both. Right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to push the putty into the gap as best we can. Don't worry about the mess, we'll clean that in a sec. Just work it in, push it in, make sure that we've actually filled the gap, and this filler needs to be inside the gap, because we ain't going to be sanding it or anything like that. We're just going to be cleaning it off. So, and then we don't have to wait, we can deal with the clean up straight away. So I'm just going to use one of these Tamiya pointed swabs, and just going to dip it into some Mr. Colour leveling thinners. So that's now, it's just simply been dipped in, so it's nice and moist, and we can then use that just to wipe away our excess. Like so. There, and then if I get a little bit of tissue and wipe around it, you'll find that we've completely filled our gap. No hairline gap at all, and we're all good, ready for painting. So let me clean up this other one, and then we can crack on with starting to paint the parts for this next part of the build.
When we flip the page, and we have to put our D3 down, which is this piece right here, which also isn't ready yet either. You know, I should have sprayed this yesterday when I did this.
Right, time to do a little bit of practice on the propellers. It's been a little while since I've done any wood propellers, and now I have a process which involves putting down a layer of the light wood, letting it dry, using oil paints. So I'd use this. So this is a Winsor & Newton oil colour. It's yellow ochre, and this is what I would normally use as my base colour on a propeller. So that's my normal way, and usually I would use oils all the way through this process. But I've become aware of various other processes, some of them highlighted in this book here, Weathering Aircraft Wood, and it goes through 4 different processes there, one of which is a sort of a hybrid of what I do anyway. So normally I will paint this on top of a white coat, and then I'll draw in my lines, and then I'll paint in with either raw umber or burnt sienna, or a combination of both, depending on the colour I want. So then I can go over it with a very thin wash of either Indian red or transparent red oxide, both of which can give it a nice sort of dark reddy brown wood hue, and then we give it a varnish. So that would be my normal process, but I haven't done it for a few years, if I'm honest, and things have moved on. We've got pencils now, so I was thinking of trying a method using acrylics, using oil brushes, and doing my traditional way, and seeing which one I like the most. So we're going to have a little bit of a play ahead of doing the actual thing, the actual propellers, which actually I'm glad to say are different to any of these. They have a brass top, but there is actually 8 spare propellers in this kit, so we've got plenty of practice to go at. But I'm rather fancying using acrylics for the speed of drying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one the traditional way. So we'll pick a propeller for that. We'll do the other 3, I think, in the acrylic. And we'll put those oil paints with that, because that's the one we're going to do, oil paint. We'll do acrylics with that. We'll do oil brushes with one of them. And then we'll do ordinary paints with one of them. So we'll use the flat brown, which has a nice reddy tint to it, and then we'll probably go over it with a dark red brown or something like that, or rust or something, and then we'll use weathering pencils for that one. To start our process, we need to paint those with light wood. Okay, this is the propeller we're going to do the way I've always done wood painting, which is with oil paints. And we're going to start by putting the base coat of the wood down. I'm using this yellow ochre, and then to thin it we're going to use this, which is a low odour thinner, which is always helpful. So we're going to start with that and see how we get on. You never know how oily these things are going to be. I generally put some on a paper towel so that it can soak away any of the oil that might be in there. The carrier is linseed oil as a rule. So okay, then that looks fairly dry, so that's good. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint this fairly thinly and build up the layers. I'm actually going to use an old number 2 brush. And the reason why I'm using an old one is I want the hairs of the bristles, if you like, to be a little bit more spread out rather than being to a point. So I could use a flat brush for this stage, but I prefer to use a rounded brush that's a little bit worn. The trouble with a flat brush is it will give you a very even coverage, and I want something that's a little bit more uneven because it'll help with the wood grain effect. So let's start. Put a bit of thinner into our palette. We'll take some of our paint . We'll start thinning that out. It's important to get all the lumps out every time you put some thinner in, and then you've got a nice even smooth paint when you've finished. And we want a sort of element of translucent to it, so we don't want to slap it on, we don't want brush strokes in it particularly, because oil paint will dry with a texture if you allow it. So that should be good enough for our starting point. So let's see how we get on with that. And it's important that we put it on in the direction of our wood grain. Now you can see the benefit of the white. If we had a darker colour, we'd have to put these layers on more thickly to get the even look, and it would make it look a bit dark. So you know, to get the colour saturation right, you'd need more layers. That, I mean, that doesn't look too bad as it is. I mean, so I'm just going to go over it. The thing with oil is it you can move it around for ages because its drying time is that slow. But if we put this on any thicker, then the drying time would be a lot more. Okay. Okay, so now we've got that on and it's relatively even. I'm just going to give it a second coat, just darken it up a little bit and put my brush strokes in to emulate a little bit of wood grain. Now when this dries, we'll be adding different colours to the oil paint here, which allow us then to put some grain effects in. Okay. Right, I've given the whole propeller now a base coat of our yellow ochre paint, and that's looking okay, but I now need to do the sort of wood grain effect. So to do that, I need to change my brush. So I want to put some slightly darker streaks in. So we've got some burnt sienna here, and I've got the thinners that have been polluted when we were thinning the paint, and I'm just going to put it in that thinners. And we're going to there we go. That can now be mixed into there, and that will give us a darker colour than we've put on. But we're going to use a different paintbrush for this. I'm going to use this stippling brush because it's got nice sprayed uneven bristles, which is exactly what we need for our wood grain. We're simply going to drag it down in the direction that we want our wood grain. Making sure that we are getting the edges of the spinner. What we don't want to do is leave anything that that should be seen as wood. And you don't stop part way down the blade because that will give you a dark spot. There we go. And you can see that gives us a nice wood grainy look, and that's effectively the pale colour of the laminations done. That needs to dry in an area that is completely dust free for a couple of days. So I'm just going to sort out this bit which I'm not happy with, and then we'll put it to one side. There we go. Nice and simple, quick, but I've got a couple of days of drying time, whereas these, which I airbrushed just before we started doing this, are nice and dry. But they don't look like wood yet, do they? Right, let's have a look at what we do with that next.